Hello and welcome. We're so glad you could join us for what may be the most nostalgic Retro Rottie video yet. We're about to revisit the eclectic personal collection of Commodore Amiga games I grew up with. First, I'll say a few words about where it all began. The Cartoon Classics Pack, which, probably like so many of you, I received bundled with an Amiga 500 Plus on Christmas Day 1991, just as the news was full of the Soviet Union's collapse. Like Perestroika and Glasnost, the 500 Plus didn't last long. It kept developing a fault and had to be replaced by an A600 HD within a year, but I will always remember the Cartoon Classics Pack. I remember this Christmas bundle package including 3 distinctive games and the amazing paint package, Deluxe Paint. The first game I ever played on my Amiga was The Simpsons, Bart vs. the Space Mutants. The first few days, this is all I wanted to play. It had a very impressive cartoon intro sequence. I seem to remember some reasonably clever multi-step puzzles for the time, making a prank phone call from a booth, and spray painting over all the objects in town, likely to encourage the aliens. I took a while to realize that Lemmings was so much better, at least for me. Also included was Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Based on a TV cartoon designed to teach children to care about environmental issues, it was sometimes described as Turrican style, although I had no knowledge of Turrican games as a child, I must admit. I didn't really like Captain Planet until years later when I had a brief period of really enjoying it, and I think almost completing it, as someone who rarely passes beyond the 5th level of any game. Next up, Lemmings. It took me a few days to get around to this game in the pack, as this work of genius from DMA Design in Dundee is sometimes considered one of the very greatest games of all time. It really deserves a thoroughly separate video all of its own. The superior Amiga soundtrack, really putting the custom chipset through its paces, was mind-blowing to me that first Christmas, and still is, nearly 35 years later. Once you complete a few maps, this innovative platform puzzler with a difference becomes very addictive and never really stops. Now, I know this isn't a game, but I should just mention that the Cartoon Classics Pack also shipped with the application Deluxe Paint 3. Affectionately known to all early 90s Amiga owners as D-Paint, I eventually decided this was surely the best thing in the Cartoon Classics box. The games were good, Lemmings was great, but Deluxe Paint had far more potential for creativity and consequently longevity. I should just mention there was a time when, if you were a serious professional games developer for a whole range of platforms, you most likely drew your game graphics in D-Paint on Amiga, so while clearly not a game itself, this application more than earns an honorary mention today. ProjectX, I believe, was a birthday present for my first birthday after we became Amiga owners. It was a spaceship blaster game with very impressive sounds and graphics. For me, it was very hard to progress through more than about the first 10 screens. It came with an A2 size poster of the box cover image, which looked quite scary on the wall at night. I don't really remember the game that well, but it was a good game in its time. I remember Premier Manager, or PM, 2 more than 3. I bought 3 later when the Amiga platform was so sadly dying. This was a seriously addictive game in which the player had to choose a football team from what was then known under sponsorship arrangements as the Vauxhall Conference, the 5th division of English football, miles below the world-famous Premier League, and attempt to lead them up through the divisions through judicious use of tactics and transfers, possibly reaching the Premier League eventually. Everyone in England was convinced that winning promotion in PM2 was virtually impossible unless you chose Halifax Town, and that in PM3 the one golden team with a fair chance was Bath City. It did seem to be true. Some of the game's algorithms may have been quite inflexibly hard-coded by today's standards, for all I know. If you ever won promotion with a different team, please let us know. We would love to know how. I remember Premier Manager 3 came with a pinwheel for copy protection purposes, which reminded me of the LP sleeve of Led Zeppelin 3, one of the jewels in the Retro Rottie record collection. Stunt Car Racer is one of programmer Geoff Crammond's much-loved masterpieces. I bought this as a low-budget game some years after its release at a newsagent in a skinny flat box. I could never stay on the beginner track for one whole lap until decades later as an adult. I wasted hours being hoisted back onto the track by the crane with the chains. The couple of times I watched another kid play it, I just couldn't understand how they managed to stay on the track, even on the most difficult tracks. I think one was called the roller coaster and maybe one the drawbridge. The flickering flames coming out of the engine holes and the cracks appearing around the windshield as the car took too many bumps was some of the best animation I had ever seen. Maybe it still is in a way. Ingenious game. Is Mr. Crammond perhaps the most highly skilled games programmer ever? Let us know in the comments. It was never known for having the world's fastest frame rate, but such great 3D physics on a stock Amiga 500 is an extraordinary feat of computer programming. Sensible Soccer and several of its sequels I played for countless hours. I could never master Sensi, as almost all kids called it, until one day I saw some other kids use an extraordinary looking palm-cupped joystick called the Cheetah Bug, with a tiny clicky stick emerging from the back of what appeared to be a plastic cockroach with 2 big eyes disguised as fire buttons. I had always had the pink and green with yellow buttons large joystick with rubber suction feet. I believe it may have been called the Quick Shot Cruiser or similar. Soon enough, my dad bought me a pair of cheetah bugs in exchange for a reasonably good school report, and I was soon scoring great goals. Returning to the Sensible Soccer series in the retro era, I always wondered, will anyone start manufacturing cheater bugs again? I seem to remember they were highly sensitive precision instruments specially sent from the future for sensible soccer addicts, but sadly quite fragile, needing quite frequent replacement in households where frantic scrambles to score a late winner in sensible soccer were the norm. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. I bought this one after the main Amiga era. My brother had bought Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge for our first DOS PC, and Indiana Jones offered similarly challenging point-and-click puzzle solving across exotic locations, but by then was cheaper than PC games and playable on the trusty old Amiga 600 in my room when the dining room was busy. Lots of long floppy disk loading times to sit through, as I recall. I don't think I ever tried to install it to my 20 megabyte hard drive. Probably no free space, or maybe that wasn't an option at the time, I forget, but a real quality adventure game nonetheless. Archer Maclean's Pool was a sequel to Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker. The same creator, Archer Maclean, the same 3D looking game engine, almost the same game, but without the famous snooker player endorsement. Everyone else in the village had Jimmy White's. Offered 3 different codes of pool from around the world, if I'm not mistaken. I bought the Pool sequel quite late, probably at least 2 years after the demise of original Commodore, and I don't recall that I had much time to play it, but it was incredibly impressive for a floppy disk, 1 megabyte machine, etc. game. Very impressive. Microprose Golf. My dad bought this expensive big box game for grown-ups. I did come to love it eventually. Apparently, it was released on some platforms in some jurisdictions as David Ledbetter's Golf or even David Ledbetter's Greens. That sounds more like a healthy eating infomercial. We only ever knew it as Microprose Golf. Microprose were king of serious simulation games, so I believe it came with a brilliant manual that could teach most people a lot about golf. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that from certain angles it was far closer to genuine-looking 3D than any golf game had ever been before. It had a great mouse-driven interface. Because of the quasi-3D environment, precise changes could be made to swing and stance that felt extremely real and could really make a difference to the result. 3D modelling of the putting greens with overlaid lines to highlight the contours for long putts was so impressive. I always remember that. One remarkable feature was the ability to save a, quote, sort of video, unquote, of greatest shots, e.g. chips out of a deep bunker, 1 or 2 bounces and into the hole, to an Amiga floppy disk. I eventually compiled at least a couple of discs full of all my favourite shots once I became quite good at the game, and I used to love watching them back. This really was an absolutely superb simulation game for its time. Geoff Crammond's Microprose Formula 1 Grand Prix. This was another expensive big box serious simulation game that my dad brought home. Another one from Geoff Crammond, the king of the Motorola 68K's registers. Most ingeniously programmed once again, but it just seemed a little too vast and involved for us to play often at the time my dad first brought it home. I was only 9 or 10. I think it came with a manual almost as big as the phone book, so to a child it seemed to have a much higher barrier to entry than Lemmings or Sensible Soccer. I think on a stock A500 Plus and later my A600, we always thought there wouldn't be time to fully load it before dinner. I'll never forget the amazing Amiga synthesizer adapted arrangement of the Grand Prix theme music of the era. The extended intro sequence shows a man in his office with a computer that is clearly representative of a period-appropriate Apple Macintosh with a distinctive single-button mouse and matching keyboard. The physics were mind-blowing for the time. The car's wing mirrors showed rival cars edging closer and dropping back and suddenly disappearing from the mirror as they tried to overtake, perfectly realistically. Wing mirrors in 1991 on Amiga hardware showing real-time movement of other racing cars is an almost incomprehensible technical achievement. And so it seems to me. I couldn't really play it very well, but was always fascinated to watch anybody play it. Super Skidmarks. I'm fairly sure this was the last addition to our Amiga games collection, long after ESCOM had been entrusted with the Amiga brand following the collapse of original Commodore, when most game shops had already totally binned their Amiga shelves and almost everyone at my school had moved on to Sony PlayStation. A very sad time for me. Super Skidmarks was a Christmas present. For this game, I upgraded my trusty old A600 HD to 2 megabytes of RAM via a trapdoor expansion. I seem to remember the mail order process meant waiting for what seemed like forever. This game was truly brilliant for its bouncy collision physics, which had to be mastered if one were to have much chance of winning. I always liked most of the sounds. It's one of very few frantic paced action games, other than Sensible Soccer, that I have ever been able to play quite well. I was mostly fascinated by the fact that it had originally been written to showcase the super powerful Blitz basic programming language from Acid Software. One would really need an A1200 to get the best from the game. This game made me desperate to upgrade to an A1200 and start coding in Blitz, but I never did until I was an adult decades later, and unable to avoid the huge gravitational pull of the Amiga retro scene any longer. Super Skidmarks has often been called one of the very last, if not the last, game to become a multi-platform success, having originated very much on the Amiga. We come to the Fun School series. We had at home Fun School 3 and 4, I think. Fun School 3 is the one I mostly remember from this series. And it was an educational frog game aimed at 5 to 7-year-olds. I was older, but my brother would only have been about 4 to 5 when this game came home, but he really loved the maths puzzles. I think at least one of the games had some literacy puzzles as well as numeracy, but I only really remember the mathematical puzzles. If I remember correctly, which may be quite a big if, the frog would perform some sort of animation like, for example, throwing a basketball into a hoop or missing the basket to indicate whether or not you passed the test. I remember very nice cartoonish graphics and sounds appropriate for the educational genre. When I was a roughly 10-year-old Amiga games developer in AMOS, strictly amateur of course, hoping to one day program AMOS in the Olympics, I always suspected that the Fun School games might be created in this marvelous language and development environment, and just the other day I was delighted to read on MobyGames that they were. I really hope that's correct. I've no reason to doubt it. I was so happy and impressed to find that MobyGames has a filter for AMOS written games, and the Fun School series is on it, along with a greater number of published box games than you might expect. That really cheered me up. Sadly, we come to the end for no reason other than that's all the Amiga games I can recall owning back in the 1990s. I did think really hard to try and remember every last one. Did I still forget one or two anyway? Who knows? I don't think so. I had cover disc demos of quite a few other games and occasionally saw others being played at someone else's house, but we didn't have a huge collection at home. I hope you enjoyed this warm trip down memory lane as much as I did. Sharing these memories with you was a genuine pleasure and privilege for me, so thank you. If you liked this video, it only takes one quick click to let us know that we're on the right track. We have plenty more Amiga and other retro tech content in the pipeline, so if you don't want to miss any, you might consider subscribing, or if you're not ready for that, perhaps bookmarking our channel page, or just keeping a good eye open for us. We absolutely love to read every comment received, and it only takes a few moments to let us know your Amiga memories, thoughts, and views. I now need to go for some long overdue Rottweiler Shnuggles. Until next time, please stay nice and well. For now, it's a goodbye from me.